All right, let's go ahead and get to it. Again, lecture 1.3 today, a brief history of nearly everything. This is the day that you guys have been waiting for when we finally actually get to start learning something about the ancient world. Or maybe that's the day you're dreading. I'm not really sure. We'll find out today. Here is the plan for today's class. We're going to start with a few announcements. From there, I'm going to have you guys do another one of these practice attendance quizzes just to make sure that everybody's on the same page for when we start this for real on Monday, right? So Monday is going to be the day when attendance starts for real. Again, this is all going to be online. It's just the one question quiz, but we'll practice that once more. And then we're going to break down all of not just Greek history and not just world history, but all of like universal history into three components today. We're gonna do in the beginning, which takes us from the dawn of the universe all the way up to the Neolithic Revolution. We'll do the rise of civilization, which focuses on the Bronze Age, and then we will dive into ancient Greece so that you guys have a context for everything else that we're gonna be focusing on in this class. When we start talking about all these different myths and places and dates and time periods and things like that, you're going to have the context in which to place all the different things that we cover. So that is our plan for today. Okay. Announcements. So with the Zoom thing again, I'm not sharing my screen, so if you're having trouble finding where this is happening, go ahead and toggle it into speaker view. Up in the right-hand corner, we have gallery view and speaker view, so just click that button a couple times, get it into speaker view, and I should be the main thing on the page, and you should be able to see the slides just kind of right over there. And that's going to be the kind of main way we go about doing this for the course. In terms of questions, all right, I've been trying to figure out how exactly best to do this. It's nearly impossible for me to actually keep track of what's going on in the chat when the messages are coming to me when I'm trying to talk. So here's what I want you to do, right? If you have a question about something in the lecture or, whatever it is, homework, assignments, how to find something on D2L, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and find who your TA is. And you can do that on D2L, right? Click who's my TA, it's going to tell you exactly who that is. And they should all be co-hosts on this. And so you can direct message them whatever your question is. And then a couple times within each of these kind of lectures, I'll stop and they can kind of forward the questions to me and I can try to answer them live. Or if we can't come up with the answer live, we'll go ahead and get back to you somehow else. Honors projects. I promise you, honors people, I have not forgotten you. This is happening. You will be able to do the course for honors. I'm just still kind of finalizing what that's going to be. A couple of things that are floating around in my mind. I don't know if you can tell from some of the imagery, but I do enjoy playing video games themed about the ancient world. So I was thinking about somehow building that into the project. Another one of the things I've been thinking of is somehow trying to use like virtual reality, like headsets or something that maybe you guys can rent or somehow get a hold of, that you can then use to like create different sites related to mythology. So these are some of the things I'm kind of thinking of here. And next week, what we'll do is solidify that, and I'll let you know exactly what you guys need to do to get the honors credit. Okay, so first things first, let's go ahead. I want to run through one of these practice quizzes again. Again, the way that this is going to work is sometime during each class, I'm going to put up a slide of my main man Heracles here, and you guys are going to go into D2L, go to quizzes, find the specific date of the quiz, and just enter whatever color he is, right? So today he is, green. Go ahead and put in green, and that should get you credit. Again, this one doesn't have an actual date or a score tied to it. So if you have any problems or you click red instead or something, don't worry about it. No big deal. Again, this is just kind of practice to make sure that everybody feels comfortable for this going into Monday. So it's 11:05 now. I will give you guys until 11:07, and then we'll go ahead and continue on. I did get one question here. If you have issues seeing colors at all, I'm always going to announce what the color is too and write it down there as well. So, I guess I don't even have to put the color at all, but like, whatever, no big deal. I'll put both of those things. I'll make sure everybody can access that. One other question before we get started. There was a question about being recorded and uploaded. I am recording these lectures and I will upload them. So sometime by the end of the day, you'll be able to go back and watch each of these lectures. The kind of way that works is the resolution I was getting by saving this thing to Zoom was really low, and it was kind of hard to see the slides behind me. And so I'm ditching that, and I'm just kind of doing a screen record on my computer. So you're not actually going to get a message that says recording. None of you guys will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about like, your kind of thumbnail video being attached to this thing. It's just going to be what's on my screen and in my image and my speaking here. But it'll always be available for you guys, and you can go back in and watch any of these lectures. And that'll be especially important if you want to kind of go back to anything today, because we are going to cover a lot in the next 40 minutes or so. All right, one other question, trouble finding the quiz. You are going to find this if you go to D2L, go to our class, and then there's at the top in the kind of menu bar, there's going to be something that says quizzes, and the one today is just called attendance quiz practice. On Monday, it'll be attendance quiz, and then, what is Monday? What day of the week is Monday? 31st? Yeah, maybe. 31st, I think. It'll say that. Then you'll just click on that. Again, if there are big issues today, no big deal. Practice, maybe I'll keep this quiz open. You can practice over the weekend, and we'll be ready to go on Monday. Okay, let's go. Oh, the answer again for today is green. And if you're having trouble hearing it, right, make sure that you got the speaker view toggled so you can see my screen and you can see everything that's on here as well. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into today's content. So, part one, in the beginning, the dawn of mankind and womankind. But we're going to start even a little bit before that. We're going to start in the big picture context, right? Going all the way back to the Big Bang. And if you guys watched the video in preparation for today, you guys are getting a sense for the scale, right? The temporal scale of what's going on here. We were talking 13.7 billion years ago. I don't even have anything like else that I can make an analogy to convey just how long ago that is. It's something along the lines that if you put humanity along this time scale, right, along a 24-hour day, and the Big Bang was like 12 a.m., humanity would be like 11:59 p.m., right? Like 1 second of that whole thing. Okay, so we are starting a really, really long time ago, and then for like billions of years, like, we get stars and we get galaxies and we get supernovas creating new stars, but we don't really get that much changing, at least in terms of how it influences us as people, right? The Earth is not even born yet, and that doesn't happen until 4.5 billion years ago, right? Again, billion with a B, so almost 10 billion years before our galaxy and our planet even exists. And to jump ahead a little bit further, our first life on Earth, this is actually very hotly debated. I don't know much about it. So if you're a paleontologist out there, I'm going to apologize in advance if you hold a conflicting view. And there are certainly conflicting views. But the kind of general, most popular argument right now is that the earliest life on Earth started like pretty quickly after the Earth was created, right? So the Earth is at 4.5 billion years. Life on Earth is something like 3.7 billion years ago. So that happens like relatively quick. If you're already kind of watching this and listening to this and thinking like, oh my God, there are so many dates already. Don't worry about the dates for now. And more or less the details in this lecture, take notes if you kind of want, but I would say more or less kind of sit back and relax and try to get the arc of the whole thing, right? Once we get into the actual myth, I want you to be taking pretty detailed notes. This is more kind of getting a sense for the big picture context. So don't worry as much right now about making sure that you have every single date down for all of these different things. I'm more interested that you're getting the big picture kind of story arc that we're telling here. But anyway, life on Earth happens relatively quickly. But it's not very interesting life. Okay, so at the beginning, for again, several billion years, these like the life organisms are these little singular celled things that like don't do much at all, right? I don't know if are they prokaryotes? I don't even actually know what that means. I learned it sometime in high school. I don't remember. But in terms of interest in life, right? Stuff that we actually recognize is like animals and stuff. We're talking something like 500 million years ago, okay? So again, still pretty long ago, but when you put that into the big scope of the universe, right? 13.7 billion, and this is a half a billion, right? So this is already pretty close to kind of midnight on the 1 day temporal scale of the universe here. But it's about 500 million years ago, during something that's known as the Cambrian explosion, that we start getting a lot of really interesting life, right? We get trilobites and we get cephalopods and brachiopods and all these sorts of cool things that we see in the oceans, and you can still find fossils of today. All right, so let's get a little bit closer, at least to having actual people. We are not quite there yet, but one of the major steps towards getting actual people is starting to stand upright. And along the big picture temporal scale here, that happens about 4 million years ago, all right? And one of the big debates when it comes to this sort of thing is kind of what ends up happening first, right? Does the brain develop first, and then kind of the other things that we consider human, right? Like walking upright and being able to vocalize things, that happen afterwards? Or is it the other way around, where we develop things like walking upright and being able to vocalize, and then the brain kind of develops, the large brain develops after that? And our archaeological evidence, right, the evidence of these kind of hominin and hominid ancestors suggests that it was kind of the kind of mechanical things that start first, right? So we are walking upright while our brains are still basically kind of ape brains. And then it's only much later do we get the increased kind of cranial capacity where we start to do things and have the brain size that we associate with being human. All right, so 4 million years ago, we're not human yet, but we're getting there by walking upright. Now we got to jump forward 3.8 million years, and our next point on this timeline is finally actually having genetically modern humans. All right, so, what we end up having here, we're talking something like 200,000 years ago, okay? And I don't know, I kind of like this picture, the modern human watching the kind of just genetically modern human who's watching me give a lecture about him. It seems very meta, I guess. But again, we're talking something like 200,000 years ago. One of the things that happens here, people like to debate this, right? And so every archaeological find that has to do with very early humans, everybody wants to be the earliest in all these things. And so you'll see different dates, 220,000, 250,000. There was one a couple of years ago that was claiming 300,000 years ago. And, these are all debated because when you're dealing with these things, right, it's frequently like a piece of a jawbone, right? Like one small piece of a jawbone that they're using to try to make a claim that this is the earliest human ever discovered. But the general consensus is that it's something along the lines of 200,000 years ago. Okay, so 200,000 years ago, we get actual humans. Now, like I was saying with the universe, you know how we get the Big Bang, and then we don't even have Earth for like 10 billion years almost. It's kind of the same with humans. So we become genetically modern humans like 200,000 years ago, and kind of for almost the entire lifespan of humans, we don't do or change very much, right? So people kind of all across the world are kind of doing the exact same thing, all right? About 100,000 years ago, we get our first evidence of actual intentional burial. And that's very interesting because people have argued that along with that, what we're seeing is the development of something like a belief in the supernatural or some sort of ritual or religion that goes along with it. Because the question would be, why else are you kind of making the effort to go to such an elaborate burial if it's not for something for the afterlife, right? Why are you depositing grave goods? Why are you using special sorts of minerals like ochre or sulfur to include on the body if it's not to somehow help in the afterlife? So again, we don't have any written texts, we don't know for sure, but it's something around 100,000 years ago where we get genetically modern humans kind of conducting the first intentional burials, and archaeologists have made claims that what we're also looking at is the beginning of religion. And then we got to jump forward again more than 50,000 more years until we start getting other interesting things, right? So far it's people walking around, eating, sleeping, trying not to get eaten by mountain lions, and then burying themselves. And finally, it's only about 40,000 years ago that we get our first examples of art, right? So what you're looking at here is the Chauvet cave paintings. So this is in southern France, and you can see horses, and you can see mountain lions, and you can see all sorts of animals. I always get kind of like, I don't know, a little bit depressed when I look at these things, because it's like 40,000 years old, and they can like draw things better than I can, and it's super embarrassing for me, but whatever. It's these are incredibly cool. These actually date to about 30,000 years old, 30,000 years ago. And if you want the 40,000-year-old thing, what we're looking at are these kind of little fertility figurines that really kind of stand as our first examples of art. All right, so we've moved now from 13.7 billion to the Earth being created 4.5 billion to genetically modern humans only about 200,000 years ago to art about 40,000 years ago. But the thing is, this whole time, like the whole time we've had humans up from like 200,000 years ago to around 10,000 BC, 12,000 years ago, something like that. Everybody's doing the same thing basically everywhere, right? You're walking around, you're trying to find food, you're trying to hunt animals, you're trying to not be eaten by animals, maybe getting some berries and nuts where you can find them, you're trying to get some sleep, you're probably trying to mate with other people, and that's basically the same for everybody, everywhere. And what that means, because you're always moving and always trying to find food, the groups end up being relatively small. You don't get like permanent settlements because then the food would just wander off and you'd be hungry. So again, for 95% of human existence, everybody around the world is doing more or less the same sort of thing. Wandering around, trying to eat, trying to not get eaten. And that all changes about 10,000 BC, okay? About 12,000 years ago. And this is where we get the end of the Ice Age. And the idea here, right, is things start to warm up. And because of that change in climate, plants tend to grow a little bit better, right? And so what ends up happening, there's kind of such an improvement in the way that plants are growing that people begin to realize it doesn't take much extra effort to just give them a little bit of extra water or a little bit of extra soil. And if you do that, all of a sudden, instead of having to go follow giant woolly mammoths around, right? You just give your plants a little bit of extra water and you don't have to move anywhere. And this kind of moment, around 10,000 BC, is what we call the start of the Neolithic Revolution, right? So neo meaning new, lithic meaning stone. We're talking about the new Stone Age revolution. And what that revolution consists of is three different things, right? So people settle down in villages, they domesticate animals, and they start farming, right? So those three things happen as a result of the climate slightly improving, right? Settling down in villages, domesticating animals, and starting to farm. Now, that doesn't sound like particularly exciting, right? So it's not like they're building like giant pyramids yet or sweet gold burial masks or anything like that, right? Things are still not particularly complex. But this is a huge, huge moment in kind of human history because of the cycle that it starts. It turns out that starting to domesticate animals and starting to farm and being in a single place has this kind of massive cyclical impact that like we're still reaping the benefits from today. And here's sort of how that thing works, all right? So this thing works because you can start farming and because you can have animals that you're raising, and because you're not moving from place to place, you can actually build up a little bit of extra stuff, right? Just a little bit of extra stuff, right? That's our food surplus right there. And because of that, what that means is the next time there's like a drought or like, things aren't growing very well, or like your neighbor steals your crops from the field or whatever, right? It means that you don't die, which turns out to be fabulous, right? So what we end up with is food stability, right? When things go poorly, you can actually still be all right. And as a result of both the surplus and the stability, what we end up getting is an increase in population, right? People are able to feed more people because they're not wandering around all the time. They're able to spend more time doing things like mating with other people and producing babies. Those babies actually have something to eat. So things are kind of going well so far. There's a surplus, there's stability, there's more people. And as a result of having more people, what we end up getting is specialization, right? And this is a hugely important thing. What this means is all of a sudden, right, for all of humanity so far, 190,000 years at this point, out of the total of 200,000, right? Everybody's job is the same, right? Everybody just has one job: go get the food, right? Or I guess the other job is like raise children and like try to, keep the cave nice or something like that. But there isn't any diversity in terms of jobs. Everybody's involved in one of those things. Now all of a sudden, you have more people, and because you're farming goes on a cycle, right? It takes a lot of effort at some times, less effort at other times. And what this allows for is for some people, right? Just some very, very small fraction of people to do something other than farm, right? Other than produce food. And so they start being able to do things like sit around and work on a piece of stone and turn it into a wheel or something like that, right? This allows for technological advances, and those technological advances then, that feeds back in to the cycle that we're talking about, right? And it gives you a bigger food surplus, right? And the food surplus leads to more stability, which leads to more people, which leads to more specialization, which leads to bigger technological advances, which leads to more food, which leads to more stability, population, specialization, technological advances, and again, and again, and again, right? So even though farming and animal domestication and staying in one place, right, being sedentary, even though it doesn't sound very exciting, this cycle is still exactly what's going on, right? We're able to produce more things, people are able to specialize, technology improves, and we continue the cycle. So there's the Neolithic Revolution for you. Very exciting stuff. Okay, as an example, this is kind of like the prototypical site from the Neolithic. It's called Çatalhöyük, and Stanford, where I was in grad school, they're actually excavating this site right now. But, imagine something around 6,500 BC, right? 8,000 something years ago. This is what the site looked like. It was really big for a Neolithic settlement, had something like 5,000 to 10,000 people. But what you're going to notice is that everything kind of more or less looks the same. So even though it's a large site, right? And even though they're like perfectly decent sized houses, everybody's kind of living in something that's very, very similar. All right, so from around 10,000 BC to around 3,000 BC, we're talking about 7,000 years there, right? This is what people are doing. They're starting to settle down and farm and produce a surplus and have food stability, starting to specialize a little bit in terms of technology. And what that ends up leading to, right? And think of the time scale here, right? 190,000 years of everybody doing the exact same thing. And then only 7,000 years of farming. And after that, you're already in to what we call the Bronze Age, or the rise of civilization, all right? Now, what do you guys think of? What's the main characteristic of the Bronze Age, right? Think about it. If you guessed bronze, oh, you're a winner today. Excellent. And it turns out, I'll actually get to it in a second, this actually I don't think is the most important thing, but this is what it's named after. What people start to do is take metals that they find in the ground and melt them together. So we get these alloys, and that's what bronze is. It's a mixture of mainly copper with a little bit of tin, and it makes for much stronger kind of tools and much stronger weapons, which then helps farming. And this is exactly the type of technological advance that I was talking about earlier that allows for more productivity. Now, what else does the Bronze Age do, right? In addition to bronze, we get things like urbanism. We're getting full-fledged cities at this point. We have like political structures. We have standing militaries. There's a social hierarchy. This is a really big one, right? Kind of one of the things that comes out of people doing different things, right? That comes out of specialization, is that the different things end up getting kind of stacked, right? So it turns out later on, like, if what you're doing is food production, that's like not as cool as like being a priest. And being a priest is like pretty cool, but it's like not as cool as like being the king. And then like soldiers are somewhere in there as well. We get material complexity, we get religious structures, writing is huge, right? If I had to pick out one thing way more than bronze, that's very critical to what's going on in the Bronze Age, it would be writing, because this allows you to capture information across time. If you think of like any other kind of technological advancement, you have to convey that verbally to the next generation, or else it disappears, right? All of a sudden in writing, you can just write it down, then you can go use your brain to like think of something else. And that knowledge is still preserved for the next generation. Now, let's go ahead. We're just going to do a little bit of kind of quick kind of cultural history of the different areas where this is going on. Again, you don't need the details here. It tends to start in Mesopotamia, which is a good Greek word, which means the land between the two rivers. Meso meaning middle, Potamos or Potamia meaning rivers. And we have the Tigris and Euphrates there, right? And this is what we tend to call the Fertile Crescent, the kind of area between these two rivers, and then also the coast of Canaan or Lebanon there. And the first culture we get is known as the Sumerians, and it's a group of different city-states that starts building this kind of monumental architecture, right? So like the ziggurat that you see here dates to almost like 5,000 years ago. And you can start to compare what these cities look like, right? So when we look at Çatalhöyük over here, we see decent-sized houses. It's a fairly large place, but everything looks pretty similar. And when we look at like Uruk over here, one of these Sumerian cities, what we start seeing, the key here is differentiation, all right? And so you're getting broad open spaces, you're getting these kind of like kind of large, kind of monumental pieces of architecture, right? Like the ziggurat that you see there. You see housing back in the distance. You see open areas where people can gather. And so the key difference here, right, is that there's differentiation in terms of what they're building and what people are doing. We get writing, right? Cuneiform. This is the kind of Latin word for wedge-shaped writing. And one of the cool things is, even though it starts out as record keeping, fairly quickly it moves on to something beyond that, right? To actually storytelling. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is kind of the classic Near Eastern tale, the kind of earliest epic that we get long before Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And then we get art and science and technology as well, right? We get ceramic craftsmanship, we get the wheel, that sort of thing, that then allows that kind of cycle we were talking about to continue. So after the Sumerians, we get the Akkadians, right? They're led by the famous King Sargon the Great, that 1,500 years after his rule, he's still known as this like monumental conqueror. And this is the first time where we actually get an empire, right? The Sumerians are a series of city-states. They're very much like the Greeks, actually, where they share a culture, but not necessarily a government. And the Akkadians are the first ones to go through this area here. Where's our area? There we go, right? And start linking up all those different city-states that you're seeing in between the Tigris and Euphrates, and they all come under the rule of this guy, Sargon of Akkad. And that's around 2300 BC. And then we continue to build on that, and after the Akkadians is the Babylonians, and if you know one Babylonian, right, everybody's probably heard of Hammurabi of Babylon, his famous Hammurabi's Code, an eye for an eye. It turns out that it's not really an eye for an eye. It's kind of like if you're equal to the other person, it's an eye for an eye. But like if you're like a rich dude and you like harm like somebody lower on the social spectrum, right, like a peasant or something like that, it's not an eye for an eye. It's like you give him some silver and that's basically you're good to go there. Or if you like, you know, do something to somebody higher on the social spectrum, then you like really have to pay like worse than an eye for an eye. So anyway, that's the thing that Hammurabi's known for, right, is this written law code. And even though it's kind of messed up, it actually is super important historically, even though it's not totally equal, right? It's important because at least everybody has to like play by the rules that are written down now, right? So when you think about that, you know, before rules are written down, if you're like a poor person and a rich person harms you, right? The rich person can just be like, oh, well, I'm changing the rules, right? Nothing's written down. I do what I want. Now, even if the rules aren't equal, right? At least they can point to something and say, hey, this is the law. This is written down. You have to play by these rules. And we'll slowly work towards equality here. After that, we get the Hittites. They're mainly in the region of Anatolia, what we call modern-day Turkey. They're known for being incredibly warlike. They're the first to develop these war chariots, right? In the relief that you see here, you can see one of these chariots. And so they're starting to combine different technologies, right? The recurve bow, along with the chariot, along with horsepower, to really be a force to be reckoned with. And they take that military power and they start to fight the Egyptians. But to get the story of the Egyptians, we actually have to go back like 1,500 years because the Hittites are like around 1500 BC. Egypt starts way back when Mesopotamia got started. And one of the amazing things, right, when you think of Egypt, in addition to all like, you know, the Sphinx and the pyramids and King Tut's mask and all that sort of stuff that is incredibly awesome, one of the incredible things here is just how freaking long Egypt, like ancient Egyptian culture lasts. It's something like 3,000 years, right? Like when you look at an image of a pharaoh around 3000 BC, and you look at an image of a pharaoh around like 300 BC, they look pretty darn similar. And if you are an Egyptologist, like don't quote me on that because like I know if you're like a Egyptian archaeologist, you have these like, you know, typologies down and you're like, oh, well, I disagree. The nose is different. But in general, they look pretty similar. All right. Now, I want to start at the very, very beginning of Egypt here, right? Not because you have to memorize this thing, but because it gives us a sense for how we made the leap, right? How people made the leap from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age. So this is one of the earliest artifacts that we've got here. It's known as the Scorpion Mace Head, all right? And it's got this guy, King Scorpion here. You can notice he's wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt right here. And he's got this little scorpion next to him right there. And that's actually where we get the term like the Scorpion King, right? He's actually a historical dude. And this is one of the guys that we think was involved in the process of unifying ancient Egypt because we see him later on wearing different headdresses. But what's important for us here is what he's holding. And you might be able to see it right here, right? And what he's holding is kind of like a pick or a hoe. And what this is used for is irrigation, right? And this is giving us a sense for how and why we move from everybody kind of being the same in farming to actual hierarchies and political structures and things like that. And the reason is when you're undertaking really large scale projects, right, like irrigating the Nile, you need somebody to coordinate things and you need somebody to actually do the labor. And so the way that we get differentiation is you get the people who do the coordinating, they become kind of the political elite, right? And then you get the people who do the labor who become the regular people. So a very interesting artifact in large part because it gives us a sense for how and why things became more complex. Now, when we think of ancient Egypt, one of the amazing things, the age of the pyramids, is the Old Kingdom, right? You would think that this would be like I don't know, much more recent, like towards the 300 BC kind of part. This is like one of the first things they do is build just enormous, gigantic pyramids that are incredibly awesome. You can kind of see the evolution here. They come out of these mastaba tombs, then the step pyramid. This one guy, Snefru, if you guys, I teach a Egyptology class. I'll be doing it over the winter session at least. And we'll get into this in a lot more detail. But this guy, Snefru, is the first guy to try to make a true pyramid with like smooth sides. But he can't quite get it right. So he tries like 3 or 4 times. And you can see one of the failures here where he started building it. And he got to about right here. And he was like, oh crap. This isn't going to hold up if I keep it this angle. So then he has to change it, and it's called the bent pyramid. Kind of interesting. And then we get the Giza pyramids. Again, 4,500 years ago, incredibly, incredibly old. The Middle Kingdom is all about like the gods and Osiris. And when we move to the New Kingdom, it's much more about temple building than pyramid building, because the pharaohs finally realized that the pyramids, while incredibly awesome, were also like a giant red beacon that said, please come and loot me, I'm filled with amazing riches, right? And they figured they should probably not do that. So they buried their pharaohs during the New Kingdom in the Valley of the Kings, right? Underground rather than kind of in giant pyramids. And all of these got looted as well, right? Except for one, right? So the reason King Tut is so famous historically is not because he was like some super powerful Egyptian king, right? It's because this is the one pharaoh that we have, right, whose tomb wasn't looted in antiquity. And so even though he was a fairly minor dude, like going in there and seeing how much in terms of riches and wealth and gold and resources were buried with this king who was a fairly kind of minor guy, didn't rule for that long, is really pretty incredible there. Okay, so this is where we've been kind of talking about, right? The Near East has a lot going on. The Hittites over here, the Egyptians down in the Nile River Valley. Now we're going to shift westward over into to the area that we know of as modern-day Greece. And to begin with, we're actually going to start down here on the island of Crete, all right, which is part of modern-day Greece. But in antiquity, in the Bronze Age, we have a couple different cultures going on. And on the island of Crete, we have the Minoans, named after the mythological king Minos. I promise we will talk more about this later in the class. In his palace at the site of Knossos in the 2nd millennium BC. And if you ever go visit this place, it's filled with these brightly colored frescoes. They were really into bulls. Everything has this bull imagery, and you can see somebody leaping over the back of a bull here. You can see these kind of wild frescoes with like weird blue monkeys. And you combine that with the fact that like one of the weirdest things about the Minoans is these massive sites, right? Palaces like this. They don't have any defensive walls. And if you're a Bronze Age civilization, like the first thing you do is build a defensive wall, all right? And the Minoans don't have them. So we kind of think of the Minoans as like, kind of like the hippies of the Mediterranean, right? Just going around, building cool palaces, painting blue monkeys on walls with weird lotus plants and probably getting real high and just hanging out being Minoan. And Minoan culture actually spreads outside of the island of Crete. So if you've ever heard of the modern island of Santorini, that's ancient Thera, and we have Minoan archaeological remains there, like this boxer fresco. You can see some of the site right here. And what ends up happening is kind of right in the middle of all this stuff in the Bronze Age, the island explodes, right? It's a volcano and it erupts around 1500 BC. And that's what causes what you see today. So when you go to Thera today, right, what you're looking at is the caldera, the rim of the volcano, in the middle has exploded out. And so you have this relatively complex civilization that explodes around 1500 BC. And of course, right, people like to say like, oh, maybe that's the inspiration for Atlantis, this complex society that sunk to the bottom of the sea that Plato writes about. And it probably wasn't, but it's still a fun story to tell. But you definitely should go there today. If we can get this study abroad program off the ground, again, Arizona and the Aegean, we will spend a few nights on Santorini, going to visit Akrotiri, which is the site within Thera where you can see those archaeological remains. And then we go hang out, right, on the rim of the caldera in the whitewashed cubist architecture with the blue roofs. And you look out over the water, right, which used to be the rest of the island before it erupted. Now, if we migrate from the island of Crete and from Thera over here, over to the mainland, we get a similar yet very different culture, right? So we get the Mycenaeans, and rather than being kind of these hippies with no walls and purple monkeys, the Mycenaeans are all about warfare, all right? So you look at the site here of Mycenae, you can see massive, massive defensive walls. These are in fact known as cyclopean walls, right? They're called that because the blocks used to build them are so incredibly large that only a cyclops could have moved them into place. You get really, really rich burials here. This is within the confines of the site itself. There are these shaft tombs that are dug down into the ground, and you get absolutely fabulous finds, right? This kind of famous Mask of Agamemnon. A lot of people think it's a fake right now. I don't know. You guys can look it up and decide for yourselves. But along with that, incredible gold jewelry, right? And a lot in terms of kind of militaristic architecture, right? Or architecture and finds. Now, when we look at the kind of like other things we get, right? We're getting these kind of inlaid daggers, boar's tusk helmets, a lot of things to do with warfare. One of the other things we get is we actually get writing. And so writing kind of starts in Greece more recently than it kind of closer to the present than it does in Egypt and the Near East. And it turns out that it's really pretty boring, all right? So most of what they're writing about are like accounting type things, right? Like so-and-so sent 50 goats to the palace, right? The palace sent 10 bushels of grain to so-and-so. Nothing that like is going to really capture your attention, but it's stuff that's very useful for organizing a complex society. Okay, so Bronze Age is all about complex civilizations starting to develop, right? Writing, urbanism, all those sorts of things. And one of the amazing things is they all fall apart right around the same time. So right around 1200, 1100 BC, all these civilizations start to collapse. Now, the Egyptians kind of attribute this to a group called the Sea Peoples, right? And for a long time, that was thought to be the kind of main explanation for why things were collapsing. It's this group of naval marauders sailing around the Mediterranean, destroying everything in their path. Modern scholars think it was much more complex. So it's a mixture of invasions along with internal rebellions caused by earthquakes, right? Natural disasters and droughts and migration and trade breaks down, all those sorts of things. So it's this kind of complex mixture of things that causes collapse in different parts right around the same time. And that ushers us into what we call the Dark Ages. And I'm just going to run through this really quickly. But all the different things that kind of go to hell during the Dark Ages, right? So palatial culture disappears. No more Knossos and Mycenae. Instead of monumental architecture like Knossos up at the top, you get like fairly dinky architecture. That's like the biggest thing down here that we have for like 400 years. A long tomb at the site of Left Candie. Settlements get smaller. There's no centralized government. Burials become poorer. No more golden burial masks. Now you get a crappy piece of pottery. Writing totally disappears for 400 years, which is kind of amazing. And instead, you just get more crappy pottery. The pottery itself becomes crappy. So like back during the Bronze Age, you have sweet octopuses and all kinds of cool things on your jars. Now you have concentric circles. Long distance trade diminishes, right? During the Bronze Age, you can find like Egyptian scarab seals on the island of Crete. Now you get crappy pottery. So a lot of different things break down during the Dark Ages, and that lasts for around 400 years until around 800, 750 BC. And let's go ahead and zoom in on Greece for the last 5 minutes or so here, and we'll see what starts happening then. Right? Now, to begin, it's important that when we think of Greece, right, we tend to think of it as the modern country that you see here. But in reality, in the ancient world, Greece is a much larger area, right? It encompasses a whole cultural area rather than a single nation with different borders here, right? So when we talk about Greece, that's kind of the area we want to look at. But if it's not a modern country, right, that makes Greece Greece, like what does make a Greek a Greek? I mean, definitely gyros, right? That's like maybe the main thing. They are delicious, right? But it's the other things, right? It's a shared language. It's a shared religion. It's a shared culture, right? Those are what binds the Greek world together because each of the different city-states has a different government. And that's one of the very important things you're going to want to kind of take forward here, right? Politically, they're all separate. Culturally, they share a lot of things. Now, it all kind of begins in the Archaic period when when the Greeks are coming out of the Dark Ages, all right? And there are a couple things that happen here, more than a couple things. Almost everything we think about ancient Greece, everything we associate with it, almost everything gets its start in Archaic Greece from 750 to around 480 BC. So one of the big things is colonization. They set sail from the Greek mainland over into other parts of the Mediterranean. We get the Olympics starting in 776 BC. We get writing reappears after 400 years, and it's finally interesting, right? Instead of accounting, they're writing like epic poems like the Iliad and the Odyssey. We get very, very complex and elaborate ceramics with iconography reappearing during the Archaic period. We get Greek temples, right? What we associate as Greek temples starts during the Archaic. And of course, we get democracy at the very end of the Archaic period, when Athens is kind of in a time of chaos. They get rid of what they had previously, which was an oligarchy. Democracy takes over, and they decide that they're going to start giving people the power to govern themselves and to make decisions. And that's really what sets Greece apart from everything else that's going around in the other empires in the Near East, in Egypt at the time. There, a single ruler is getting more and more and more powerful, and in Greece, power is being distributed from a single person to the people who are getting to make decisions for themselves. Now, around 480, 490, 480, there's a bunch of wars between Greece and Persia, and Persia is the largest empire the world has ever seen to this point. And somehow, these dinky little Greek city-states, they're able to defeat them. And that ushers in the classical period where all those things we just talked about, right? Art, ceramics, philosophy, those types of things kind of reach their peak. So we get things like the Acropolis. We get things like Greek philosophy, right? Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. We get even more beautiful pottery. These things, again, kind of reach their pinnacle during the classical period. But things fall apart. And eventually, it's a guy from Macedon, Alexander the Great, who basically takes over not only Greece, but starts expanding Greek power eastward into the Persian Empire. And so you can see a map here, right? Greece is this dinky little thing over here. Alexander conquering way out all the way to India. He conquers Egypt, builds the new biggest empire the world has ever seen. But after he dies, things split apart, right? Think of this as like Game of Thrones time, right? And so his successors, his generals, his heirs, they take over different parts of Alexander's kingdom. And for the next few hundred years, they fight amongst themselves to basically see who's going to gain power. But the problem is that no single group is able to defeat the others. And while they're fighting amongst themselves, the Romans are building power in the West. They swoop in. They are able to defeat the successor kingdoms of Alexander, and we enter this period of Roman Greece. So that is a kind of brief history of the kind of entire world, entire universe, all the way up through Greece. Again, don't worry about knowing the exact names and dates, that sort of thing. I just wanted you to get the big picture perspective here. Over the weekend, relax a little bit. Think about how awesome ancient history is. It is the best. If you are somebody who does actually like this stuff, think about taking one of my kind of history-based classics courses in the future. And next week, get hyped. We will start actual mythology then. So have a great weekend, everybody. I will see you all on Monday.